So, welcome to CEIBS Research Meets Management webinar series. My name is Vivian. I work for CEIBS Zurich team as a senior program manager. And together with my colleague, Georgina Charles, we are the hosts for you today for today's webinar. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you our speakers today. So I'll start with Professor Yajin Wang. She is a professor of marketing at CEIBS. Prior to joining CEIBS, she served as a faculty member at Robert H. Smith School of Business at the University of Maryland. She is a marketing expert with specializations in consumer behavior and branding strategy.
And we're also joined by Christina Senn-Jakobsen. She's the Managing Director of Swiss Food and Nutrition Valley. She's passionate about food innovation, and Christina aims to help solve some of the most pressing global issues related to food. With a core focus on food science and nutrition, Christina believes collaboration between sectors is fundamental to better and faster innovation, and she aims to put Switzerland firmly on the map as a leading nation in sustainable food and nutrition. So without further ado, Professor Wang, the stage is yours. Professor, I think you're still on mute.
There we go. So welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very excited to be on this webinar, discuss about my and our most recent research regarding to this topic about sustainability and food, and where do we get our lunch from next. So I'm a marketing professor. I study consumer psychology and how consumers react to new technologies, including new technology that is applying to food industry. So today, freshly, I'll present, or I will share with you guys some research results that we've done here at CEIBS, and I also collaborate with colleagues across the world. So for example, one of the main contributor of this project is my doctoral student, Chi-Hui Chen. So there's a lot of collaboration behind the work I'm presenting today. So basically, I think, a couple of years ago, we were all interested as a research team that how do we solve the meat problem, and how, I think that's also the focus of discussion today, is we know that meat consumption is big and also become problematic. And many people don't really realize that, especially I'm talking about Chinese consumers, for example, right? The knowledge about actually consuming meat is contributing very negatively to the sustainability and environment is something really fresh. But in fact, many scientists have pointed out that is a problem, right? The US particularly has a huge consumption per capita for meat, global for nutrition and protein consumption. So it adds pressure to the environment, and the livestock creates all kinds of problems, including environmental and animal welfare, so on and so forth. So what's the potential solution? There are many potential solutions. One solution could be just do not eat meat, right? And that's difficult. So, food industry has to develop the different technologies to trying to find something that is alternative meat. And today, I wanted to share with you something we focus is lab-grown meat. And one of the potential promising solution for this problems associated with consumption of meat is to actually take livestock out of the equation, right? So imagine that we can now have meat without raising animals. And that would seem like science fiction a couple of years ago, but it's actually getting into realization. So meat produced from animal stem cells uses cellular technologies in laboratory setting. Actually, there's more than just meat. There's also dairy product like egg and milk. Seems to be one of the solutions. And in fact, many investors have big investors from private sectors, from government agency, has been invested in this in its area. And not too long ago, Bill Gates, in an interview with MIT Science, he made a point that all rich countries should basically switch to 100% synthetic beef. So giving all this passion about the industry as well as investors, actually Singapore became one of the countries who first approved lab-grown meat into the market. So in 2020, in December, chicken nuggets, I believe. I haven't been to Singapore ever since yet because of pandemic, but I know that it was quite a news that the government actually approved this to the market, and consumer now can buy them either on a delivery system or in a restaurant, right? So the question for us basically is very simple. How will consumer react to this? Will consumer accept it? Does it take a long time? Are they gonna gut feeling that there's something not right? I mean, the technology itself, it's still in the progressing of improving. However, we also need to understand how do people think about this technology is basically our research question, right? So prior research on food generally have the sense of people usually don't like things that are unnatural, right? So we call it this natural is better biases. So if anything that is unnatural, somehow consumer intuitively think it's not good, right? So there are different types of concerns or reasons why this could be the case. For example, because unnatural things is just not as nutritious, doesn't taste good. So there's often some trade-off among the product features, as well as some of things that are difficult to change, then something like ideology or ideational reasons, right? So something is wrong, right? There's something wrong about unnatural. So our research is basically to look at how do consumers react to different types of lab-grown food. Will they react differently towards lab-grown meat versus other types of lab-grown food? The question is interesting itself because prior research would tell us if producing food use similar technology, consumer would react to them similarly, right? So here we wonder if there's a difference among category, and if so, why that is the case. So if we look at what does real lab-grown meat or other types of food does to people's psychology, right? So when people think about this, what is come to their mind is something we're trying to understand. So we thought that actually when you mention to people about lab-grown food, something about perception of creating life is triggered in consumers' mind, right? So if you think about life, normally we think life as a like a two binary dimension, but in fact, it's continuous, right? We perceive things as from non-living to living. And we perceive objects or things in this world, whether more towards non-living objects or living objects. And what determines how consumers or people perceive something that is living or not, they're actually related to two things. One thing is about the outcome. It is, the object itself, to what extent this production resemble life, right? So in that perspective, we think meat is part of animal body, right? It has more life properties, including, cells, tissues. It's more complicated. So therefore, meat versus other dairy product, lab-grown meat is perceived as resembling life to a larger extent. And the second aspect about this is more of a process, right? So the process we are creating this product, to what extent that reminded people of creating life. And we also think producing meat involves the process of developing more complicated biological structures from basic structures. That is more so than producing a dairy product. So from this, we argue that probably consumer will have more negative reactions towards lab-grown meat because both the process and the outcome meat compared to dairy product reminded people of, using this technology of creating some sort of life. And that's something itself, it's a violation of the law of nature. So if you think about law of the nature, right, people all have some sort of sense of what governs the universe. For religious group, that is the God. For non-religious groups, you can think of people believing in evolution. You know, there's a sort of a natural law of natural selection. And even for people who don't really know about Darwin or evolution, they all have a sense of, you know, what would be the law of nature, right? So that is the broader thing we're looking at. So in the end, what we're proposing here is consumers will have more negative reactions towards lab-grown meat versus other type of food. And this is because the lab-grown meat triggers a stronger perception of that creating this is like creating life, and therefore it is violating the laws of nature. So that is basically our theory, and we actually tested it in different experiments. So in academic research, what we do is we're recruiting consumers from different regions, and then when provided them information about this product, and basically we're trying to assess their attitude and the reactions. So I'm going to show you some of the empirical studies or results we find. So the first study is that we compare consumers' reactions towards lab-grown meat, lab-grown seafood, and lab-grown dairy products. Why we include lab-grown seafood? First, that's something that, you know, the industry is moving towards. And second, you know, we think that seafood actually, although it's considered as another category from meat, especially in the Western culture, but it depends on the culture. People also call it meat. In China, for example, they call seafood as fish meat, right? So the idea is that we think fish, seafood also trigger this perception of creating life. So we just want to see whether that's true or not. Anyway, so we had 3 groups of people separately evaluate their willingness to pay towards lab-grown food in this particular category compared to the same type of food produced in the conventional way, right? So how much are you willing, less or more willing to pay? As you can see, on average, people are willing to pay less, right? Because it's below the middle point. However, you can see there is a significant lower willingness to pay for lab-grown meat and lab-grown seafood. The dairy product is better, right? So there's no difference between meat and seafood, but there is a better or more positive attitudes towards dairy products. So that's basically what we were predicting as well. And in the second study, I'm quickly showing you here, is that we also compared another production method, it's plant-based, right? So plant-based, either meat or dairy products are in a much more mature category. And the idea is that they're not really producing quote unquote real meat, right? They're taking elements from the plants and mimic the taste and the structure and the texture of the real meat. So in that sense, we think plant-based meat, actually, if you think about it, it's not really about creating life. They didn't create something out of a cell, right? They're actually taking things from the natural environment. So we think the differences among different categories among plant-based production should not be there, right? So we were just wondering if that's the case. So this time we take about 600 samples from the US population. And again, we ask their willingness to purchase. So you can see the results here. Let me just briefly tells you guys what the results means. Basically, you can see, right, the willingness to purchase, obviously, for the conventional method is the highest, right? That's what people are used to. That's where they are willing to buy. The plant-based is also significantly higher than lab-grown based, right? So you can see there is still a the resistance towards lab-grown food is still there. However, very interestingly, the differences between dairy product and the meat is only existed among lab-grown sector, right? So people have similar reaction to plant-based dairy product and plant-based meat, right? So that's, I think, that the interesting about the specific technology that of lab-grown is which may connected with what I described earlier, is that lab-grown somehow make consumer feel like you're creating something, right? Creating life. And that aspect is resembling at different levels when it's meat versus dairy product. So then we had another study where we're trying to see if the reasons we're trying to project here about the creating life and the violation of natural laws is actually the truth. So in sort of psychology research, we do test them in a statistical way to see if that's actually the underlying mechanism. So this is how we measured the perception we're creating life, right? So we ask people, the production of this particular product, how much of that reminds you of the process of creating life, is similar of making life, is a replacement of the natural reproduction process, right? And then we also ask them, to what extent do we think this type of production violate the law of nature, right? Do you think this product goes against the law of nature, breaks the dynamic balance of nature, etc.? So what do we find again is that, first of all, consumers' willingness to purchase for lab-grown meat is lowest, right? So the differences between meat and the dairy product, again, disappeared on the plant-based side, right? Only on the lab-grown side that people have lower willingness to purchase towards lab-grown meat. And then we also actually tested if the perception of creating life is the strongest among meat, and that is indeed the case. So you can see, right, for plant-based, people don't think we are creating life. Like I said before, right? For plant-based production, you are taking something from the natural environment. So people really don't think you are creating something, resemble life here. And for lab-grown, the lab-grown dairy product is more so about creating life, but not as much as lab-grown meat. And in terms of violation of natural law, it's exactly the same pattern, right? People don't really think plant-based meat or milk or egg is really violating the laws, but however, right, for lab-grown meat specifically, that is definitely the highest on the violation of the law of nature. So we did a complicated model to demonstrate indeed that is the case. Okay, I'm not going into the details for this one. So the question then becomes, right, how can we improve this, right? If this is the case, and perhaps maybe there are other solutions, but if we think lab-grown meat is the solution somehow for the future, can we do something about it? So because our research shows that this is the sense of this creating life, right, that is driving the effect. So maybe in our communication to our consumers, we need to dissociate them, right? We need to dissociate consumers' the mind of this type of product and creating life. And in fact, we've seen some of the advertisement from the companies, which are sort of trying to say this is exactly like meat. And our theory would say, if you say that, that's probably worse, right? Because the more you say it's like meat, the more people will think this is freaking me out, right? This is really the violation of natural laws. So let me show you, we did 2 studies to see if we have some methods to improve the acceptance. So one thing is we think about maybe we should deconstruct the concept of meat. Right. So if we're thinking about why consumers think meat is more resemble to life than dairy products because it has more complicated nature, it has a higher level of biological organizational level. So we propose that if we deconstruct the meat into components at a lower biological level, maybe that will attenuate the consumer's reactions to lab-grown meat. So what we did again is we recruited American consumers. We sent out 3 different type of, they are into 3 groups. 2 groups received advertisement and 1 group received nothing as a control group. So we did 2 advertisements. The first one is a deconstruction advertisement. Basically, we're trying to tell people that lab-grown meat is nothing but protein, water, and fat. So the idea is that don't think of this related to animals and life, but think of it literally as the component, as a lower biological level. So our theory would say, through this approach, right, people should trigger less perception of creating life. For the control ad, we just tell them, we didn't tell them that information, basically. And then we had another condition where we don't have any advertisement, right? So here's the results I'm going to show you for the acceptance of lab-grown meat based on the advertisement or information they receive. So the deconstruction advertisement receive the highest or more positive attitude. However, you can also see for the control ad, it's still also more positive than no ad. So in the no ad condition, we basically just told them what lab-grown meat is. We didn't provide any more sort of persuasion in a sense like that. Also for the perception of creating life, we have similar results, as well as the perception by violating laws, right? So you can see, interestingly, through the deconstruction advertisement, people think this approach or this methods of lab-grown meat indeed have a lower level of violation of law of nature. And we did another intervention where basically we think that, okay, how can we use another way to make consumers disassociate the process of creating life, right? So if they think lab-grown meat is because you take a tissue cell or a feather cells and you grow it to more of a complicated biological structure, maybe we can make an analogy of telling consumer that actually this is much simpler than you think. You are not creating something from simple to complication, but it's sort of like the plant cutting, methods where they just grow in a natural environment almost, right? Just let the cell grow. You don't really have this development stage of life. So what we did is that we think, join an analogy between producing lab-grown meat with another production methods that can weaken the perception of creating life should attenuate consumers' resistance towards lab-grown meat. So in this studies, we basically had two groups. One of the group read about the process of cultivating lab-grown meat is similar to grown plant cutting into vegetables and fruits in the greenhouse. We provide a neutral rich environment and let nature do the job, right? So here you can see again, we're trying to use the persuasion message to reduce the association between this it's artificially we're creating life here. And in the control condition, we did not make such analogy. So what we find that again is that indeed, if we make this analogy, the consumers' perception about willingness to purchase for lab-grown meat is significantly increased. They have a lower perception of creating life if we tell them that this is just like a growing plant, and they also have a lower perception of violating of the laws of nature. So in the end, I think to summarize, our research is basically the first empirical research that will investigate consumers' reactions towards lab-grown meat. And we sort of trying to put into a systematic theoretical approach, right? So we want to know, whether there is a fundamental resistance that related to human evolution that towards this type of technology. Because if you think about it, right, humans have been, we have been getting food from the natural environment. I've been eating meat since thousands of years ago. And we often acquire food in a certain way. And that is, rooted in our brain and our evolution history. And this is the first time actually the technology that used in the food, you don't really need in live animal anymore. And that somehow probably is connected fundamentally with our evolution. And that's why we're trying to use a more of a fundamental framework to look at this issue and to see, and then within the similar technology, we find differences among different categories. And I think that's exactly because these different categories are triggered a different perception about how much are you creating life per se, and also how much are you violating the laws of nature. And also, this research, I hope that it's a very, we're excited about the results. We're still continue doing research in this area, but I think we're also trying to shed some light on marketing practice or for policymakers, right? And if you understand the mechanism, you can see that actually how is this can improve consumers' acceptance. For example, right, I didn't have the slides here, but we actually have some additional data shows that if you tell consumer this is 100% meat, that's the worst, right? So consumer likes this to be taste like meat, but the attitudes towards it is increasing as you say, okay, very similar. And once you say this is identical, they actually don't like it. And I think that's exactly the reason we are proposing here is the more you put this lab-grown meat into the category of real meat, the more sort of violation of nature laws it is. And I think that's all about my presentation, and I'm looking forward to some Q&A later.
Thank you very much, Professor. And now we hand over to Christina. Christina, it's over to you.
Thank you very much. And also, thank you very much for inviting me in to talk today. Professor Wang, this was really, I mean, how exciting, fresh from the press, as you say. And I didn't know that marketing was going to play such a big, important role in the future of foods. I would like to now talk further about meeting the future and maybe zoom out a little bit from this very close-in perspective we've had on meat, although meat and what meat and how much meat we eat in the future is of paramount importance here. I will briefly talk about why food matters so much in this debate about a healthy planet and healthy people. I'll present to you the Swiss Food Nutrition Valley and highlight a few challenges and solutions, and finally, shortly about a special case here. So briefly about me, I'm a food scientist by nature and taking the journey into the corporate life where I was with a big company for many years before I started working more with startups and innovation. And today, as the managing director of Swiss Food Nutrition Valley, I work with all of these groups where I've been before, be it the politicians or the universities and so on. I call myself a food passionista, and my role is really to make sure that we drive food innovation towards a better and more sustainable food system here. So firstly, about why food matters. I believe 99.999% of all people will agree to food being the best thing in the world. I mean, no celebration without great food. We travel with food. We bring together family and friends on food. Food nurtures our body and make little babies grow into healthy, strong individuals. It takes care of our immune system. It makes an athlete perform his best. And if you need to use your brain strongly, there's other food types you should eat for that day. So food is just the best for us, no day without it. Unfortunately, we can also say without blinking that food is the worst thing. And let me explain why. The food system, as we know it today, is producing as if our resources were infinitive, and they're not. We've had, agriculture is probably the biggest revolution that we've had. It enabled us to go start trading, and it enabled us to grow and stay in one place. But where it is today is we're simply living beyond our planetary boundaries when it comes to this. So 30% of the greenhouse gas emissions are linked to the food systems. We're overfishing. 70% of our freshwater usage, it's used within food production, from agriculture to production. The biodiversity loss is on the shoulders of how we do agriculture today, and so on and so forth. So it's fair to say that the food sector is the biggest sector driving the climate crisis. And on the other hand, we have a health crisis, which, if you ask young people, everybody knows about the climate crisis, but the health crisis is not so debated and discussed. But we have diabetes being the fastest growing disease in the world. We have today around 2 billion people being overweight and beyond, and another 2 billion people who do not have access to safe and nutritious food. We waste way too much, and we don't actually know how to feed the population in the future. This crisis we thought we would stand in 2050 has moved up very close based on the war that we are in the middle of today. So food is the problem here, but it's also the solution. And luckily, that's where we put our heads up, these solutions exist. And what I would like to talk to you about now is what is a small country like Switzerland doing here and showing off as a large food nation. And interestingly, I was reflecting on it. If we talk about food nations around the world, it is often small countries. Israel being a food nation and a startup nation. We have Singapore on the map, which is stepping up tremendously on unleashing food innovation. Holland, or the Netherlands, which also are very known food nations. So there's something here with small countries being big food nations. Each one of these countries have different strength that they play on when it comes to unleashing food innovation. And it's very important for me to say that we are not competitors. We are collaborating and we're working towards solving the same problems. And we know that collaboration is the only way to do that. For Switzerland, I will let the chart speak for itself, but there is a strong history. There is a lot of innovation happening. We have strong universities, we have strong technical people and talents, and all that leads to Switzerland being, for the 11th year in a row, the #1 innovation nation or innovative economy in the world. And also, just since last year, rated as the world's strongest nation brand. And hearing about marketing, I think that will have to play a role in accepting cultivated meat or cultivated food in the future. So who is Swiss Food and Nutrition Valley, and what do we do? We are a young association, not for profit, only launched 2 years ago. And what we do, or what all these change makers or change members, as I call them, do within the Valley is they believe that through collaboration, we can unleash the innovation potential that the Swiss food ecosystem has and address the 2 problems I talked about before, where food and our food system plays such an important role. This is really, the middle green box here is really what we ask all our members to reflect upon. What do they bring to the table here, and what do they take away before joining us? Under that, we have 4 pillars of operation. One is about this knowledge exchange and networking, which is key to drive collaboration. We work with 5 different impact platforms, which are the usual suspects, as I call them. It's about sustainable packaging. It's about sustainable meat, future farming, food systems 4.0, and precision nutrition. There is a special focus on having a landscape where food innovation can thrive, and therefore we're looking a lot into policies, the legal and the administrative frameworks of fostering innovation. And finally, when it comes to talents and fundings of innovation, we are supporting that and finding solutions. It is a Swiss initiative, but as I say, it's a privilege to have all this, and it's an obligation to unleash the innovation for the world and share everything. So the drive is to have a worldwide impact here. So when we talk about the ecosystem and the ecosystem players, who is that actually? Well, you know the term from farm to fork, or from field to gut. Maybe it's soon going to be from the lab to the gut. It's everybody in and around it which engages here. So also including the governments, especially research coming from the universities, maybe as a starting point, investors, accelerators, and startups. And then, of course, the whole food value chain, starting with the agriculture and going into companies, retail, or the restaurant business, and finally ending up with the citizens. Today, 2 years into our journey, we are about 100 members. I think next week will be 100 across these different stakeholders. And as I say, we have collaboration at the core, meaning that although there are competitors amongst our members, they leave the competitive spirit outside the door and go in and live together to unleash innovation when they work in the valley. Pioneering future-proof food systems together, that's what we aim to do, bring back the old Swiss pioneering spirit. So now I would like to talk to you a bit about some of these challenges and solutions we see out there with examples from startups, and also then a case study and a little remark on cultivated meat. So I mentioned food scarcity, or that we do not know how to feed the future population. And just something to shake up the minds here. Today, we're around 8 billion people. We predict that in 2050, this will raise to 10. So it's fair to say a 25% increase in population. Yet the prediction says that we need almost 60% more food to be produced. And the reason behind that is that the population, as well as growing, it also becomes more affluent. It will be stepping up on meat consumption and other resource-intense food produce. And hence we see that the production will rise with almost 60%. At the same time, we as people on the planet Earth and our politicians are setting goals to reduce the carbon footprint and to reduce the land use here for agriculture. So it's really a paradox we're in, and the only way forward is through innovation that can drive this and make it possible. And to this, cultivated meat, cultivated food products is absolutely one of the solutions. Maybe jumping a bit ahead, but I saw there was a really cool question in the Q&A about, should we switch 100%? We'll address that later, but no, it's one of the solutions. So if we look at food waste, this is a good place to start. And if you listeners take anything away from my talk today, it would be make yourself a little audit on your food waste and put 2, 3, 5 actions in place. They're easy Googled, and stop wasting so much food. We waste 1/3 of all our food, and the majority of that is still edible. Switzerland is the black sheep in Europe. I can say that Europe has an average of 180 kilograms, but Switzerland is way over 300 kilos actually. So there is something could be done, because as soon as we reduce our waste, we solve all the other problems that I mentioned, and more than that. We all the water use and the pesticides and whatever, we reduce everything by using our beautiful produced food. So some of you might know Too Good To Go, which is a startup that really set up to sell things end of day, which would not be sold in the outlets the next day for half the price. They talk about rescuing meals, and it's very successful, and the consumers are loving it. Kitro is another startup used mainly in the gastronomy business, where through scale and photos, they measure the food waste, bring awareness to the chef and the restaurant how much this actually costs and how bad this is for the environment. And they can start regulating and understand when it's sunny, people don't eat this, and so on and so forth. Another challenge of the food system, I already touched base on it, is the human health crisis. And here the opportunity lies within precision nutrition. So we know that in 60% of all deaths, there is an influence by people's food choices. Yeah. We also know that 70% of our immune system resides in our gut. And this microbiota and microbiomes in our gut is influenced by what we eat. Here, my best advice is eat as many different vegetables as you can, minimum 30 different ones every month, and then you will be doing something good for your gut. What is interesting here, though, is that one person's superfood is another person's poison. Means I could react and thrive on strawberry, whereas Professor Wang, it might not be for her. She might get strong on spinach, whereas my body might react to it and say, and give me an inflammation, which will slow me down, weaken the uptake of good nutrients, and really not make me my best performing. So that's where the precision nutrition, where people's DNA and so on is measured. And we see a lot of exciting stuff happening here. One of them is the US startup Genome Link, which exactly do that through DNA analysis. They go in and they specify for each individual what are the goodies, the superfoods, and what are the baddies, the poisonous one. And just to take this serious, there are certain cancer types that are influenced and triggered by food choices. And it's not transparent for us. We do not know unless we go in and link this. Good. I want to free some time for questions. Sustainable proteins. We had this exciting deep dive into the consumer's acceptance of cultivated meats. This is so important because the 50% of the global, I'm not talking 50% of the food, but of the global greenhouse gas emission comes through our livestock. And here, especially beef is the big baddie, both because of what it requires of land and what it produces of greenhouse gas emission, but also because it's a meat that we eat a lot of globally. So here we see these meat analogs, plant-based meat analogs coming out, and also the cell-based alternatives. Now today we only have Singapore, which has regulation that allows them actually to serve it. In Holland, there are some regulations coming up allowing them to test it. US is moving forward here, but let's see. But actually the case is there is not a market today, but there's a lot of innovation going on. There's a lot of great startups ready to go out and launch as soon as this changes. So still at a costly price, but that is also being worked on. So there is an exciting future here lying ahead where we can reduce the amount of livestock on the fields. Future farming, we still need to produce and we still need to farm. The hope is we will get also some of our proteins more and more from plant-based sources. And here we know that the land that we use today for agriculture is very deprived. Some say we have 65 harvests left. There's not enough nutrients in the ground. And apple today in Europe has 5% of the nutrients it had 30 years ago because the soil is deprived and because we grew apples for looking pretty and being resilient and taste good over its nutrients. So a lot of opportunities, as I like to phrase it, also in the future of farming. One example is eco-robotics from Switzerland, where this machine will be driving around on its own and through cameras can detect, is this the plant we want to grow and then give it some fertilizer spot on, or is this a plant that is damaging for our crop and give it a few drops of pesticides. Today, we spray the landfills and damage our drinking water, whereas we could reduce this amount significantly if we would start using technologies like eco-robotics. Good, the final one, plastic. 80% of all the plastic ever produced, I think the big peaks came after World War II, but they're still around. Although we recycle, although we burn it, it's still here in the ocean or on land. And it's going to be here for many more years to come, around 500 years for an average PET bottle to decompose. Again, here, lots of great stuff going on. Busius is one of them. They are making packaging from algae. And yeah, we will see great opportunities. So it means it can still carry something, but it will go back in and nurture the nature. Maybe I need to talk to these guys, maybe in the course of 10 years or even shorter. So quickly on the case study, we have Planted Chicken, and this is a startup in Switzerland, was founded only 3 years ago, actually, and today has more than 150 employees and launched across Europe. And I talked to you about the ecosystem and collaboration and the importance of that. Here, Planted is a great example of how they actually use the Swiss ecosystem. So they were ETH from a federal university, technical university in Zurich. They were graduates, worked on projects, and went out and joined some of our accelerators, Kickstart and Mass Challenge, got into the gastronomy, restaurants and cafes across Switzerland. Seeked investors here, Blue Horizon being the most famous one, I think, managed to get in our duopoly retailers and is today enjoyed and consumed by the very curious and innovative Swiss consumers. So this is a true success story. And as you saw, they're now launching all over Europe and scaling up. They are also looking into the future of meat and what comes after. Just in case you wonder, there's no chicken, implanted chicken. It's all based on chickpeas. Chickpeas, water, and a third ingredient. Very clean. Good. I am coming. Oh, I don't know what happened here. Do you see my screen still?
Yes.
Okay. Let's go back on that one. I couldn't help but put in this slide when I was hearing Professor Wang talking, because it's great to hear what's said today, but actually Winston Churchill said almost 100 years ago that we shall escape the absurdity of growing a whole chicken to eat the breast or a wing by growing these parts separately under a suitable medium. And I thought that was really a foresightful thought of him to put it down that accurate. Yeah, that brings me to the end of my presentation. If anybody wants to stay connected or check out what the Valley is doing and what's happening in Switzerland, here is the QR code to our LinkedIn where you'll find a lot of interesting reading stuff. And then I shall stop sharing my screen.
Super, thank you so much, Christina. Now we'll move on to the Q&A. So thank you for everyone who has posted questions into the chat. And I think maybe, Christina, you'd seen slightly the first one. So to move to 100% synthetic meat probably doesn't make sense from the perspective of the goal of reducing global emissions as animals eat agricultural byproducts, for example, crop rests, that humans don't eat. This is from an MIT technology review, the source. Would you agree with this?
Yeah, so I don't believe in 100% of anything. It's always too risky. And we also have seen how fragile our food system is now that the European breadbasket, being Ukraine, is falling out. So that is one way of looking at it. But when it actually comes to these, I would love to read this article because I haven't. The side streams or byproducts, if we talk about sugarcane production with bagasse being traditionally animal feed, today we produce single-use cups and whatever for it that is biodegradable. When it comes to beer production, where we have a lot of side stream, we also use more as pig feed. Today, we're using that to do meat analogs. We're using it to do pizzas and flours and a lot of things. So humans are increasingly eating side streams, and startups are increasingly finding ways to upcycle. This is where we come into circular economy. There are many reasons why we shouldn't move into 100% vegan from today to tomorrow or 100% synthetic meat. But I think the short answer is yes, I agree.
Thank you. And the second question is about how big the fraction of consumers that have probably changed their minds on the consumption of lab-grown meat as a result of the COVID-19 zoonotic origin theory, so due to the environment destruction and also with the purpose of enabling intensive farming.
Is this?
Who would like to take that one?
Oh, I'm not sure if there's an accurate number on to be honest, most of the consumers haven't even heard about it. For consumers in Singapore, obviously they already have this on the market, so they could try it. But I think during the process of doing research in this area, we find that people, if you tell them how this has come about, they read about it somewhere, right? So, I mean, the familiarity is there, but they still have a lot of questions about it. How exactly, how does it taste? Is it really the same thing as a real beef? But like we said, the interesting thing about the consumers' reactions to us, it's probably not something at the beginning, not about something technology can solve, right? Because technology can make this taste even more similar to the real thing, and it can, increase the nutrition and be it as a very good alternative. But I think there's something fundamental about people's reactions towards this type of technology, where you sort of are creating something that is maybe humans shouldn't know. I think that's sort of the perception of people have, and what we observe in the consumer's mind. Not necessarily about how. I think the percentage of people actually who consumed it is quite limited at this point, due to the available market is only there.
If I may add to it, I don't know the actual answer to this question, but just around it, what we know is that the term lab grown puts the consumer more off compared to if we talk about cultivated products or meat products. So there's this notation, and it's understandable why. And another thing is, I think we should marketing / informed choices. I think that's the opportunity we should give the consumer. If the consumer knows for a fact that the 70% of the antibiotic that resides in our bodies is not from medicine, it's from meat consumption. Yeah. So it's actually fighting our immune system, something. And if you take, I was about to say lab grown, if you take cultivated meat, you do not get antibiotics into your body. Yeah. So I think it's about these informed choices, and then leave it to the intelligent, smart consumers to gauge, do I feel comfortable with this? There's a price point. We need to address as many things. Yeah. But yeah, let's get it out there. An animal didn't need to suffer for me enjoying this steak. I don't get antibiotics in my body. As you say, it's designed to be more nutritious, maybe. There's definitely opportunities. I'm sure COVID had an influence on, we know it has a big influence on food choices, but specifically, I don't know.
Thank you, Christina. I guess another interesting question probably for Professor Yajin. What's the meat consumption per person per year that's considered sustainable, etc.? For example, for different world population scenarios and per meat type. Any comment on that?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? What's the
meat consumption per person per year that's considered sustainable?
You want me to put a number? I'm not sure I can calculate that on a global sense, but I can tell you, in the US alone, the average meat consumption has grown from, somewhere around 230 pounds per person in 2014 to 264 pounds in 2020. And globally, the meat consumption has increased by 58% between 1998 and 2018. So these are some of the numbers we know, but I don't have offhand, how much should a person eat. However, right, the thing is, should we, I'm quoting this content from the interview with Bill Gates in this MIT interview, where he basically made a point, which I tend to agree, is that it's probably not the country who are in the developing stage who adopt this. It's actually the developed country, the rich countries who are responsible for the huge meat consumption, as well as have more options towards the synthetic meat, the plant-based ones.
Thank you, Professor Yajin. Another question probably is for Christina, that you mentioned about NL, correct? But NL has also a major problem with tackling the emissions and the pollution caused by the agriculture sector.
Yeah,
so the question, it's probably unlikely that countries that cause the problem will be able to provide a solution. So what's your comment on that?
It's unlikely. I would like to talk to this anonymous attendee to understand it a bit better, the question, because I'm sure there is some knowledge behind that. So what do we know? We know that that 80% of the greenhouse emission is caused by the G20 countries, which is actually 19 countries, ironically. So the big economies are the ones where we need to see things happening. And I actually do believe that they are a part of the solution. Switzerland falls just outside. We would be the real number 20 if we were allowed in. But when we see these are the big nations and big countries, they have the opportunity to invest governmental fundings into unleashing these innovations. And they should take this opportunity. And it's not even an opportunity, it's an obligation. Now, when does it start hurting? When their populations start getting hungry. Are they the first to hunger and starve now that we get a food shortage? Unfortunately not. But at one point, also the G20 countries, unfortunately, this is my prediction, will feel this food shortage coming up. And that is when my hope is that they will up their game, move some of their great fundings, for example, from supporting traditional farming system and giving them subsidies, move that into the future of farming and into sustainable methodologies. So the short answer, I guess you don't agree, do you? No, I don't agree. I actually think these countries are very much the ones that will up their game and unleash it. But if there was a chance, I would be happy to hear your thoughts.
Thank you. And another question here is, so while the 15% GHG emission from livestock is a global average, what I understand is that these numbers are far lower in developed countries like the US, where the GHG emission from livestock is closer to 3%. One specific example that stood out to me was that the milk of 10 cows in the US produces the same amount of milk as 100 cows in India. Wouldn't it be better to invest in improving efficiencies in countries like India and China, which are some of the largest contributors to this 15% global average, rather than growing meat in labs or finding plant-based alternatives? Christina, would you like to start?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Great question, and I'll start with this short answer. No, it won't be better, but it's, and that too. When I talk about for the Swiss Food and Nutrition that we have a platform called Sustainable Proteins, it's very deliberate. We don't call it plant-based proteins because we have a lot of meat and dairy production going on in the world, and we will continue to have so. So yes, indeed, we shall start producing that in a more sustainable way. And this is known to be true. The Swiss liter of milk is like 1/10 of it produced in a specific developing countries. And even in Switzerland, we have new modern farms coming up where it will further halve the thing. So how do you halve the greenhouse gas emission from producing milk? Well, very simple. The emission comes 95% from the cow burping, not farting. 5% comes farting, but burping. And if we feed the cow with feed, that lowers the burping reaction, then we're on a good way. So animal feed, and we have huge, amazing companies working on exactly that. And we need to make that feed available to these countries, which have real big challenges here. So yes, this is a part of a solution. And I know there are people working on it, and we really need to step up all over the place.
Yeah, if I may add quickly, I totally agree with Christina. We never say there's, to me, it's also a holistic solution, right? We're doing bits and bits here and there. We're coming from the demand side, we are coming from the consumption side, and coming from the production side. As well as for some of the developed countries, I think, yeah, definitely China should step up in the game. And I think right now the hot topic, at least as a professor in CEIBS, we request many requests from the companies who wants to understand more GSE and how carbon nutrition footprint and all of that. And that's why we have an entire area devoted to this. And, you know, we talk to executives, Chinese companies, you know, foreign companies who operate in China. We receive huge requests from them. They want to understand this and how they can contribute. So I think to answer the question from the audience, that's definitely some part that I do believe it all, you know, we all need to put effort in.
Okay, So due to the time limit, I think we have to stop here. But thank you very much, Professor Yajin, and thank you, Christina. And we will send the follow-up email with summary slides and the link of the video if you want to watch back. So I hope to see you all in our next webinar. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Christina.
Thank you, Professor Wang.